and welcome to episode 40 of the Bibliophile series. In this series, we go through articles and I try to read it to the best of my ability, give you some external perspective, and perhaps we read and understand what is going on in the passage. Let's go through the first one today. This article is about Cheng Li, Shades of Grey, Not Newsworthy. Cheng Li is journalist from Australia who was imprisoned in China on some charges. She was recently released and she is from Australia, but of course, she is a native Chinese, but she's now an Australian citizen. This article appeared was written by Wanning Sun and appeared in Australia China Relations Institute. It was relevant because of the recent visit of the Chinese Prime Minister or Premier, one of those people visiting Australia. Let's read through it. Okay. Yeah. For a while, everything about Chinese Premier Li Qiang's visit to Australia seemed to be going smoothly. Indeed, ahead of Li touching down, even opposition leader and former China hawk Peter Dutton said he would very much welcome the visit. Okay. Chinese Premier Li Qiang is visiting Australia. Now, China hawk is a phrase used for people or especially politicians who are critical of the behavior and actions of China. China doves are those people whose statements and actions are very much aligned with the interest of the Chinese government. People who are critical of China are known as China hawks. Okay. So everything about Chinese premiers being visit to Australia seemed like it is going smoothly. Even Peter Dutton, the leader of opposition in Australia, and he seemed to be welcoming the visit of Chinese premier. Everything is going smooth. And then a change. So when Chinese embassy staff tried to block Australian journalist Cheng Li from view during a Parliament House signing ceremony, the incident, while reflecting poorly on Beijing, was also a godsend for conflict-starved journalists. This has two pieces of information that you should get from it. One, the fact that Cheng Li, an Australian journalist, was stopped from attending the Parliament House signing ceremony. And journalists are always looking for conflict. If everything is going smoothly, if everything is in alignment, journalists don't find it entertaining or welcoming. They are looking for conflict always. Okay. Taken into custody in August 2020 on suspicion of carrying out criminal activities endangering China's national security, Cheng Li, the Australian journalist, was detained in China for 3 years and 2 months and then released just 9 months ago. Judging by how enthusiastic the media were to talk to Cheng Li following the incident, you could be forgiven for thinking that anything she said about China and Australia-China relations would be of immense interest to them. And this is usually how a news cycle runs. When something is at the top of the ticket, then lots of coverage, lots of information about the issue is spread. But once it dies down, it goes away in entirety. For instance, in India itself, you would perhaps remember, there was a time when you had immense coverage of a car running over homeless people or a drunken 16-year-old driver hitting a motorcyclist, a scooterist. And then there is outrage for 1 week, 2 weeks. At that time, lots of news channels cover it. Then 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, everybody forgets. Even, let's say, the IAS officer storyline wherein people are using fake disability certificates in order to secure their seats. That story will also die down because that is who and what we are as a population. We have very short attention spans, and whatever is the story of the day, we feel very strongly about it. But then we move on from it because we have other things to take care of. Okay. Now here, the author is making the claim. It was expected that whatever Cheng Li said about Australia-China relations, it would be of immense interest to the journalists. It would be of immense interest to people who are reporting on it. But you would be wrong based on her appearance in a recent UTS ACRI public event. What is UTS ACRI public event? I don't know. But it was some public event where she appeared and she made some statements. And it was not of immense interest to the people who were reporting it. The event featured Cheng Lei and her partner Big Boy. Seems like her, her partner, most likely her husband, but could very well be a boyfriend, could very well be a living partner. But partner is mentioned, so we'll take it as partner. And invited in person and live streaming audiences. As you would expect, quite a few journalists registered to attend. Lots of people had claimed they would turn up. However, despite Cheng's high profile in Australia, it seems none of the Australian media ended up running a story, despite her envoy speaking for over an hour. In response to questions from moderator Glenda Corporal from the Australian is a magazine, as well as from the audience. So, Cheng Li had mics shoved in her face, lots of news agencies asking for her opinion. And she holds a public event, and lots of people turn up. And she answers questions for well over an hour, asked by the moderator and also by the audience. But then no news story runs on it. However, there was an article from South China Morning Post. No news in the Australian media, but a news story in the Chinese media. Okay. What explains the conspicuous absence of such coverage? Conspicuous is remarkable or observable absence of such coverage. If you were in the audience or read the transcript of what Cheng and Coyle said, you might get some clues. So why it was not covered, why it was not run in any newspaper or any daily, it depends on, it is contingent on what they said there. First, what Cheng said seems to challenge rather than give succor to some popular binaries perpetuated by our media. Okay. Basically, see, media loves to have very simple narrative. This person is evil or this person is godly. You cannot possibly have a nuanced debate about these are the good qualities, these are the bad qualities, where do you draw the line, where there is a give and take, there is some sort of compromise, nothing of that sort. We need a very simple thing. This person should be banned, this person should be jailed, this person should be released. All of that happens. So when Cheng seemed to challenge that idea, binary idea, popular binaries perpetuated by the media, then it did not really behoove them because it does not fit in with their agenda of pushing binary narratives. Okay. For instance, our mainstream media tend to portray Chinese Australians, especially first generation PRC migrants, Chinese Australian within them, People's Republic of China migrants, as either flag waving patriotic Chinese supporters who turned out for Premier Lee's visit, or as anti China critics and dissidents who protested against Lee outside Parliament House. See, the idea is simple. Either you are fully, wholeheartedly committed to China, first generation Chinese immigrants, either you're fully, wholeheartedly committed to China, China is my home nation, we are proudly waving our flag, or you are protesting. You cannot possibly lie outside these two camps, perhaps agree with China on some fronts, perhaps disagree with China on some fronts. You are supposed to be monoliths, either entirely in the camp supporting China or either entirely in the camp opposing China. Okay. But Cheng Lei refuses to see her relationship with China in such black and white terms. China, she told us, is a place comprising different parts. Okay. Describing herself very much a shades of gray person. Essentially, what Cheng Li is saying, about China is not a monolith. It's not like everyone within the Chinese officials, the government, the population, the different individuals, entities that are present in China, all of them don't think alike. Lots of them differ on issues. Their opinion is on a wide-ranging spectrum, and there are different shades of gray involved. Different shades of gray is basically multiple viewpoints are involved. Okay. There's also a tendency to consider those who are not vocally critical of China to be pro-China. Just because you are not outwardly saying China is doing this bad, that bad, that does not necessarily translate into you are supporting China. It could very well be that you are harboring resentment, you have dissent, but you feel like it is an futile engagement and therefore you stay away from it. But Cheng believes that attachment to some aspects of China and loving Australia should not be mutually exclusive. It's not like, see, this is very much, perhaps you can get a better idea of this. When France won the 2022 Football World Cup, when France won the 2022 Football World Cup, the team comprised primarily of French players who had African roots. And when Germany won the World Cup in 2014, they had lots of immigrant population who were also in the team, primary among them being Mesut Ozil. Now, when these people lose, when these opposite teams lose, which had migrants present in them, then they say, oh, these immigrants have come over here, they are causing our nation to lose. We were such a powerhouse, this and that. But when they win, they say, oh, our French team is so great, we have won. And the story on this was there was a host, Trevor Noah from the Daily Show, and he sent out a tweet. Congratulations to the uh, Af- African players who won the World Cup for France, something along these lines. And then the French external minister came out with a statement stating Trevor Noah is being racist because he's denying these French players their Frenchness, blah, blah, blah. And Noah simply retorted on his show because he has a bigger platform and bigger number of fans. He simply retorted, see, I'm not denying them their Frenchness. What you are doing by saying they are French players, not African players, you are denying their Africanness. They could very well be French, they could very well be African, they can be two things simultaneously. Now that I think of it, perhaps a similar and a simpler example in this time would be uh, Donald Trump cannot wrap his head around the fact that Kamala Harris has an Indian mother and a Jamaican father, an African American lineage person from Jamaica. So she's African American, she's part African American, and she's also Indian. So he's going around attacking her, saying, well, sometimes she says she's Indian, sometimes she says she's African American. How can you be both? Blah, blah, blah. Basically, you can't be biracial. You cannot possibly have loyalties at two places, which is what is also being stated here. But Cheng believes that her attachment to some aspects of China and loving Australia should not be mutually exclusive. You can absolutely love Australia, but that does not necessarily mean you have to hate every aspect of China. She seems suspicious of talk of belonging that is premised on undivided loyalty and nationalism. You are either fully in this camp or you are either fully in that camp. You cannot possibly be somewhat here and somewhat there. That is the sort of stand the media wants it to take, but that is not what Cheng Li believes in. Okay? And then she seems suspicious of of belonging that is premised on undivided loyalty and nationalism. And this is a statement made by her. When it comes to China, it just evokes so many feelings in me because I'm a very sentimental person and China represents so much. And we all have hopes for people to get along, for beauty to be appreciated. And the whole nation and the whole concept of nations is fiction anyway. Okay? Perhaps if you Google or research, the entire concept of nation, the concept of nations, states, districts, cities, all of this was done for administrative purposes, not to keep people apart. But over a period of time, what my group and your group, the tribalism instinct kicked in, and then we ended up having my place is better than your place, and my place is superior to your place. So the entire concept of nations is fiction anyway. It's not like these nations were uh, preordained or they had some useful purpose. They were only for administrative purposes. They were not for pitting people one against another. Okay. Cheng also reminded the audience that the demonization of China can directly cause suffering for Chinese Australians. Okay. If you also end up saying China is wonderful, you don't have to say that, but you also shouldn't go at the other extreme and say China is demonic or everything associated with China is demonic, because that can have detrimental effect for Chinese Australians, the ones who are living in Australia. If you keep on pumping out the message that China is demonic, China is doing bad things, China is wrong, then those Chinese people who have moved to Australia, of course, they are going to face racism and discrimination, all sorts of negative things while they are living here. China becomes a dirty word, and that might sometimes affect people who live here, people who have family and business interests, and a great affection for China. And I just wish people would be less extreme. Basically, let's allow for nuanced discussion. Let's allow for possibility of having dual loyalties without necessarily being entirely in one camp. Cheng seems to resent being often typecast by people seeking to conform a particular framing of her to their various political agendas. I would go one step further and say not just political, also media agendas. Writing about her experience at Parliament House during Premier Lee's visit, she said, I do not like the feeling I'm fodder for China hawks or an unfortunate existence for China dubs. And fodder for China hawks would be they can pick up my example and say, oh, see, this is how cruel China is. They are even stopping journalists from visiting. I don't want to be a fodder for China hawks because there are aspects of China that I like. And an unfortunate existence for China dubs. I also don't want to be people who are sympathetic towards China. They end up saying, this is an one-off case. This is not how China usually behaves. You look at the issue at hand. Don't try to generalize and paint everything in the same brushstroke, is what her message is. Okay. Cheng said that she hadn't realized that media landscape was so polarized. You are either with us or against us. This is a statement that became very famous after 9/11, and George W. Bush said us, either you're with us or against us. And that line, not necessarily that line, but then the political discourse, the discussion, everything around it has moved towards either you're with me or against me. You cannot possibly have principled objection to anything I do. If you're supporting me, you have to fall in line for everything I say. If you don't support me, you have to, if you don't support me, then you are the enemy. Okay. And to her, to present China and Australia-China relations in polarized terms may jeopardize rather than serve public interest. And that is not just true for Australia-China relations, that is true for everything. When it comes to ways of writing about China, she told the audience that demonizing is not the way. She wanted to see a rational, more intelligent discourse that does not label or cancel people. You shouldn't have extreme reactions. If somebody questions something, answer the question rather than saying, okay, this person is doing bad stuff. Like we have in India also. If somebody, for some reason, dissent means disloyalty in this day and age. If somebody points out a flaw with how India is being run or how things are in India, you get a flurry of Twitter and different places can respond. Go to Pakistan, go there, go leave this country. Just because I dislike one thing does not necessarily translate into I hate the country. Just because I like one thing does not necessarily translate into I love the country. Why can't somebody have different takes on different issues and still be loyal towards their own country? Or they need not get cancelled, they need not get labeled as patriotic and unpatriotic over it entirely. I think we should first agree on facts. I think a China hawk still she wanted a rational, more intelligent discourse that does not label or cancel people. You don't put people in camp straight away. You should have a more nuanced discussion on the issues. And this is again a statement made by her. I think we should first agree on the facts. I think a China hawk still agree that China is our biggest customer. The biggest exporter or biggest importer of items from Australia is China. I think a China dove still agree that some of China's behavior is belligerent, aggressive. I'd like to see newspapers not labeled as left or right. I'd like to see the commentators who are not always about the same view and get the same guess on. This is where perhaps I'll introduce a term called confirmation bubble. You would notice this in your household as well. If you have elder people in your family, in India, elders are key decision makers. If you have elder people in your family who support BJP or oppose BJP, the choice of news channels is very, very evident what news channels they would be watching. And they would keep on watching the same news channels repeatedly. They wouldn't venture out. The problem here, of course, is see, if you appreciate the problem in very, let's say, base level business terms, these media houses or news back in the day earlier was about simply transferring of information. Then around came 9/11. Then you started having, after 9/11, prior to 2001, there weren't all day news channels. Then came 9/11. US had this flurry of 24-hour news channels. Once the news cycle died down, I mean, there wasn't enough to report on for 24 hours. They transitioned into creating their own news. And these big media houses, that is where a lot of our Indian businesses also looked to. In fact, a lot of these media houses also invested in different media houses in India, and they started 24-hour news channel. That is why if you've ever seen any news channel which has uh, 15 minutes, 30 news, and within those 30 news, there are 8 news stories about the same issue, which could have been happily covered in 3 lines. But the need to sensationalize to get more and more eyeballs. So in order to create loyal customers, you had to generate controversy, you had to generate a news story yourself, and then you had to cater to or provide information to a particular set of people who would firmly be in your camp at all times because it is a business. Media, where it was supposed to be the fourth pillar of democracy, where it keeps those in power in check, has now turned into agents for those in power, and it is a propaganda machine. So, which propaganda are you looking to peddle today? That is more critical than honest dissemination of information or critical coverage in a fashion that is beneficial for the consumers. Okay, that is why most of us, even when we want to track news, we don't really watch news channels. We read stuff, and hopefully, when we are reading stuff, we are keeping up. We are aware of our own particular biases, and we keep away from reading only from one source. Okay. These comments were perhaps, what I mean by confirmation bubble is, if I believe in a certain way, and I bring on 2 guests in my meeting who believe in the same way, and they keep on giving me reasons why my way of thinking is correct, I'll believe, yeah, what I'm believing is absolutely fine. When there is nobody to challenge, when there is nobody to question the belief system, of course, I will keep on peddling the same narrative, and people who are watching me will believe, yes, this is the gospel truth. And that is something that has happened in US right now. See, Pew Research is a research organization based out of US. They did a research, and they randomly tested some hundreds of people, those who were naturalized or immigrants who had come to America, those who had come to America, immigrants, but illegal immigrants, those who were undocumented. And then they did natural born Americans. Out of these 3 groups, the group that is more likely to commit a crime is natural born Americans. Yet, you'll never hear of Americans being criminals. You will always hear their media will always talk of immigrant crime, immigrant crime, immigrant crime. The number of crimes committed by natural born Americans is higher in number and is higher in percentage also. For those of us claiming, no, immigrant population is lower, therefore the number of crimes they commit is lower. No, the number of crimes committed by natural born Americans, even in percentage terms, is much, much higher than immigrants. Additionally, uh, once you repeat a lie 1,000 times over, people will start taking it as the truth because there is no challenge to it. They're living in that confirmation bubble. So that is what you should be moving away from. You should be looking to uh, interact with people with diverse opinion and learn from them in the same manner. Okay. Their comments were not perhaps were perhaps not what our media expected to hear. At the event, the Sydney Morning Herald, is a newspaper based out of Australia, Eric Bagshaw asked, "It strikes me that both of you, out of most anyone in Australia, would have cause to feel aggrieved by what the Chinese government has done to you." We read in 2020 she was put into jail and she was released after 3 years and 2 months. And yet, I don't get a sense that from your comments, and indeed that bitterness, if there is any, is mostly reserved for the Ministry of State Security, your treatment by particular officials, but not for the Chinese government as a whole. Or perhaps, rather, the Chinese people and the country as a whole. Perhaps you can see the distinction. When something wrong happens to you, it is very easy to lay blame on the biggest culprit, but then you can see it's not like they are blameless, but then the bigger portion of the blame should go to the particular actors. The portion of the blame should go to the particular actors. It should not go to. So very often we have this in reverse happening. Very often we have this in reverse happening. Let's say if you buy an Apple product, somehow the product doesn't function and you go to the shop and then you don't find it, the company will send you a mail. If you go to the shop and talk to the technician and he says, no, this cannot be fixed, this cannot be done, then you get angry at the technician. You don't get angry at Apple because of which has policies that has led to EU finding it for a lot of malpractices, not uh, not providing tools to third-party vendors who can fix it, and in their own shops they always ask you to replace the item. All of this, EU has much better consumer protection laws because of which Apple has USB-C cable charging in Apple phones that are sold in EU. But in India, no, we have a special charging point because of which you would have to buy a charger separately. And in the name of environment, we will not even sell you the charger when you buy the phone. Every time you have to buy a new charger if you lose it. Absolute nonsense that happens in India is unparalleled. Anyway, so when we are dealing with corporations, we tend to blame people, not the corporation itself, despite its policy. But when it comes to, let's say, places where there is some degree of discretion allowed, and when it comes to government officials, there is some degree of discretion allowed, there you should blame the individual, not the entire. The government is not blameless, but then the government is not the major party at fault. It is the individual that is at major party at fault. Additionally, the government and the people, as much as government is a representative of the people don't really decide a lot of stuff. Even in India, let's say you and I, if India decides to do something stupid at the international stage, you and I cannot be blamed for it because we did not really decide that. Most of us, a lot of what is a popular public good does not really come up in political circles at all because it is not politically exigent. And there are fun stories around it. For instance, I'm sure we would love to have greater tax levying on rich people. And what I mean by rich people is, see, agricultural income in India is tax free, but that should not translate into anyone who is earning more than, let's say, 50, some random number, 25 lakhs, 30 lakhs, 50 lakhs. Beyond that point, agricultural income should be taxable. Keeping agricultural income entirely non-taxable because it is politically exigent is not sensible. But okay, how that goes. And then people make these very, very emotional arguments. Farmers are the backbone of the country. They provide us food to eat. But then our teachers, let's say, not my institution is more of a coaching. Think of school teachers. Think of school teachers. They are not important. Why are they being taxed? Is their job any less important than farmers or doctors who are practicing professionals? Is their job any less important than farmers? Importance of a job being an argument for not taxing a certain section of the population is not sensible. When I'm not saying tax everyone, have the same limit or perhaps be even kinder to them. Give them a 10 lakh, 15 lakh. That is when you start to tax them. But make sure you tax them. And I'm sure you will find a lot of support for this from the salaried class, from the middle class. Anyway, Uh, how hot? Okay, this was a question that was being asked by a Sunday Morning Herald, Eric Bagshaw. He stated that you people don't seem to be angry at China overall. You seem to be angry at particular actors in the storyline. And how hard was that to maintain against a sense of optimism in the face of extraordinary challenges that I imagine Australia could not even comprehend? And this is a very nuanced question. This is an absolutely wonderful question. Perhaps a discussion on this should take place, but no Australian newspaper even chose to run a story about this. During the past 3 years, detention not only deprived Cheng Li of physical freedom, but also to some extent muted her voice. Of course, when you're imprisoned, you will not have stories going out from you. Against her wishes, she had indeed become the fodder for China hawks, as well as an unfortunate existence for China doves. What she did not want to be, she did not want to be fodder for China hawks, an unfortunate existence for China doves. In detention, she had little control over how her story was being told and whose interests were being served. She was mostly spoken to by the Chinese authorities and about by the media and commentators. She has been represented as either a hapless victim or an icon of martyrdom, whereas her personal opinion on the issue are at are miles apart from being a hapless victim or from being an icon of martyrdom. While she is angry, she is upset. There are certain individuals she is upset at, not the entire population. In the meantime, she has also been denounced and pilloried by some commentators on Chinese language platforms who literally call her a traitor. Remember, she was put into prison for endangering national security. So there they will have their own agenda, the music news media running their own storylines of how she was a danger to Chinese people. And therefore, her getting labeled as traitor is not very surprising. Now, she's back in Australia and free to write and speak her mind. And as it turns out, what she has to say does not always make a good story. The attributes of a good story is being very, very binary in nature and having some sort of conflict. The fact that it is not binary in nature does not make it a good story. To be clear, Cheng Li does not mince words when she criticizes Beijing. She talks about China's censorship, its political control, and its lack of freedom. If you were thinking she was turning into a China dove, her latest article in the Australian will disabuse you of that notion. It's not like she's soft on China and saying, no, no, everything is fine in China, everything is nice. Nothing of that sort. It is just that she wants a more nuanced discussion of the issue. On the other hand, she thinks there is too much fear mongering about China and that our fear of Chinese influence and interference may come from lack of confidence in our democracy, Australian democracy. She asked, can we be more confident in our own values? Why are we so afraid of China? So, what is not newsworthy about Cheng Li saying all these things? And what does the absence of coverage of this event tell us about our media when it comes to reporting on China? Could it be that they did not think it newsworthy, or was it just too difficult to find an angle that would resonate with audiences and editors? Not really. It is not difficult to find an angle that will resonate with audiences and editors. It is just that that is not where the money lies. That's not where the money lies. That is not where you will get clicks and eyeballs. To be sure, there was scarcely any bitterness and outrage in her talk. There, that might have made for a better story. See, conflict. I am angry. I am angry. I am upset at China. That would have made for a better story. As Nick Coyle, her partner, commented, everyone loves a bit of outrage. And it would be hard to translate her statements into clickbaity headlines. Exploring her resilience and remarkable capacity for complexity, ambivalence, and even contradiction may not help sell papers or drive online traffic. Precisely the point that I was making earlier. They're going down that path. It does not make for good business if you start talking of nuance, because one, you have conditioned your audiences over a long period of time to not focus on nuance, look at binary outcomes. And now that the audience has turned, if you give them something nuance, it's most likely going to go over their head and they will move on to some other news source It's not like they are loyal to and fault to about a media outlet. Okay. Perhaps most importantly, a lot of what she said seems to fly in the face of the discourse on China that our mainstream media have contributed to building. The binary outcome theory. Either you're in love with China or you absolutely hate China. Some journalists could even have taken her assessment of some of our media as simplistic and lazy. Perhaps the media people who had turned up for the event felt like, oh, she is saying negative things about us, and maybe that is the reason why they chose not to cover it. As a not so subtle criticism of their work, that's the case. Wouldn't reporting on her criticism of the media amount to an own goal? Basically, if somebody is critical of media and then you go ahead and report it, then it would be negative for you. Why would you want to do it? Sometimes a good clue to our media's mindset is not what they tell us, but what they do not. Absolutely wonderful article. Goes through a lot of issues. Perhaps the external examples also help you gain a better understanding of what this is. In terms of word analysis, there were 1,292 words, 62 sentences. The reading level is around 10 to 11th grade reading level. And the flash reading score was 67.97. Plain English, easily understood to 13 to 15-year-olds. English is not difficult here. It is more uh, the external context that you need to get to that will make this article easier to understand. That will be all for this episode. Hopefully, you learned something. Yeah, bye.